Hello there and welcome to this webinar. My name is Mark Anderson. I am the Head of Education at NetSupport Group. And on this, our third in our series of webinars, we're going to be exploring data protection and data privacy and the usage of data in education. I'm absolutely delighted to have some fantastic guests that are super knowledgeable in these areas, and they are my go-to de facto. If I've got any questions, then they're always sharing widely on a variety of social media, such as X, formerly known as Twitter, and LinkedIn. But above and beyond that, they also share an awful lot of the latest thinking, latest reports and guidance, and these sorts of things. So I'm absolutely delighted to have two amazing expert panelists. I'll bring them on one by one. And let them talk about themselves and do their accolades, but they really do know their stuff. And over the course of the next hour, we'll be unpicking questions around, say, the topic of data protection, privacy, and usage of data in education. The first person I will bring on is Claire Archibald. I'm spinning plates today, bringing a few people and pressing buttons and things, but welcome to the webinar, Claire. To kick things off, could you share a little bit about your work and your experience in the world of data protection, please?
So thanks very much for having me. I feel really flattered by all the praise you've given me so far. I hope we live up to it. I work for a service called the Education Data Hub. We're a traded service operating out of Derbyshire County Council, and we offer data protection officer as a service services to around 400 schools across the whole of the country. Started up a little late, started up in 2019, but the last 4 years have been a real roller coaster in terms of what's been going on in schools, and it's been absolutely brilliant to kind of hold their hand through the challenges that they've faced over the last few years. And we also look at cybersecurity, and we do work with schools around cybersecurity and online safety as well.
So you've got nothing to do then, right? You're
No,
just sort of
yeah, looking for things. I describe it as trying to drink from a fire hydrant, to be honest. I've got a never-ending thirst for knowledge, but I can't quite drink it all fast enough. Yeah.
Crikey, I think that's a really nice analogy as well, because particularly, and I'm sure our other expert panelist Tony will attest that when I bring him on in just a second. But the goalposts move so frequently, don't they? And it's so difficult to stay on top of that when there are so many other things to be considering and thinking about in education. But like I've shared, the cornerstone of any decent sort of technology use in schools needs to be underpinned by a strong foundation and making sure your data protection, privacy policies, and everything you have around that and around online safety. If you don't get those right, then everything else might be likely to fall over a little bit. So really pleased to have you share with us.
Before I worked in doing this job, I did actually work in a school. So back in 2016, I was working in a school, and it was very different in 2016 to what it's like now in 2023. The pressures are enormous, especially when it comes to the use of technology and digital tools in the schools. So yeah, it's been really hard for schools.
Yeah, and it's so expensive as well. It's too expensive to leave it a chance, isn't it? You want to make sure you get it right, because if you're spending often hundreds of thousands of pounds on the sort of equipment within your school, even more if you're in a trust, you can't leave it a chance, can you?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, listen, let's bring on our next expert panelist. This is the one, the only Mr. Tony Sheppard. Some of you may not recognise him without his face paint on. Known as Tony the Tiger if you ever visit Bet. But Tony is somebody I've known for many years. Probably for as long as I've actually been, working in education, actually. And there's always been someone who has sort of been very measured and tempered, but always at the cutting edge of knowledge about what it is to use technology in education. So it gave me great pleasure to welcome somebody who's now a colleague of mine as well, the one and only Grumbleduke, which is Mr. Tony Sheppard. Welcome to the webinar, Tony.
Thank you, and thank you for those kind words. It's strange to think that I'm coming up to 25 years of working in education and ed tech now. Well, sometimes it feels a lot longer, I'll be honest. But no, over that time, I've had a chance to, from starting off as a mouse cleaner, toner changer, as a techie in schools, through to an assistant head, local authority advisor, working on some national projects for edtech suppliers. And I've done the DPO side of things, schools DPO service. I've done a whole range of things, and now my day-to-day job is information governance lead at NetSupport. But I also work with other edtech vendors. But the whole idea is to make sure that the vendors are doing the right things by the schools, their customers, and also making sure that they give the right tools to the customers, to schools, so that they can make the decisions about what they want to do with data and, have a privacy first approach. So, but yeah, it's been quite a lead up to everything that's gone on over the last 5 years or so. Has made it a very interesting place to be within EdTech, because of the GDPR actually has been a major change globally, and has had an impact on so many other regions. So, as a global company in NetSupport, we have to have a look at lots of different things. And it's interesting to see what's happening with the US and with US vendors, but we'll talk more about that later. It is ever changing. There is a lot out there to get your head around. And sometimes it's just looking at what bits you can apply common sense to more than anything else.
And I think the word common sense will probably come up quite a lot actually in our conversation, at least I hope it does. But
not quite as common as many people think, though. So
I know, gumption, as my granddad would call it. But I'll jump in with the sort of first sort of proper question, as it were, and I'll ask one of you if that's okay, Claire. For those in the audience who are keen to get started, maybe don't know much about this topic around data protection, privacy, and usage, could you share what the current landscape sort of looks like for schools around data protection, privacy, and usage, please?
Oh yeah, definitely. So when we started off our service, there were some schools who were with us from the very beginning. They knew that GDPR was coming along. Tony mentioned that was a big trigger for change, and they knew that they had to do some different, some more enhanced work, particularly around things like DPIAs, etc. And so there were some schools that really got cracking from the beginning and have done a really good job and have really kind of got an embedded data protection culture in their school. That is not all schools. So you've got a real mix. So you've got some schools who really still only beginning their journey now in 2023. And I think perhaps, the first 5 years we've had a bit of a phony war when it's come to the GDPR, and schools maybe the pace of change hasn't changed that fast, or staff haven't changed quite quickly, and so now they're thinking they've been stung by a nasty data breach, something going wrong with one of their vendors, a really nasty subject access request. There's been a lot more sort of prevalence in the press and knowledge about data protection. It's clearly here to stay. It's not a fad. It's not a latest craze in education. It is the law, and it's going to stay. And so there are some schools out there who haven't done anything, who are just starting their job. I'll go and visit them for the first time, do a data protection audit, and they will say, I'm really worried you're going to find that we're in a terrible situation. We've done absolutely nothing, and I'm really ashamed about that. I'm going to hold our hands up and say, we really need your help. And I say, if I had a hot meal for every school that said, I'm really panicking because I've done nothing, and that is absolutely fine. If you've done nothing, doesn't mean that you can carry, you need to carry on that way. You don't need to be ashamed of it. Let's get started now. Now is as good a time as any, and don't fret about that. And yeah, okay, there are things in the last 5 years you should have been doing fine, but actually let's get it right going forward and fix those kind of retrospective things that we've done as and when we get round to them. But what's most important is that your forward trajectory takes into account things like data protection by design and default, good cybersecurity, good data hygiene practices, so that it's a really varied landscape. You've got some schools who are really mature, and you've got some schools who are very much on the beginning of their journey. And I really want to reassure you, if you are listening to the webinar and you are on the beginning of your journey, that is absolutely fine, and you can still get started now. Similar picture within the EdTech landscape. So you've got some EdTech vendors who are really mature with what they're doing. They're really used to some challenging questions from schools and are ready and have lots of resources ready to support schools with the work that they need to do. And you've got some vendors out there who this is the first, the first time I start asking them some questions is the first time that anybody's asked them the questions of the nature that I'm asking. Likewise, it's fine. And I think EdTech vendors are usually pretty grateful to have a friendly face saying, maybe you need to think about getting some documentation down or getting your website in order, etc. So really a varied landscape.
It definitely sounds so, and certainly, I think, like you were saying, I think the important thing is for schools, if they haven't been on that journey, it's about starting that journey, isn't it? Because like I said, that forward trajectory is the most important thing. And it's lovely that you mentioned the role of edtechs, because it's not just the schools that have responsibilities around these sorts of things. It's incumbent upon the businesses that sell technology into schools to consider these things as well, which leads nicely onto, and you mentioned things like privacy by design in your sort of introduction, Tony. It leads quite nicely on to my next question. It's almost like we prepared for this with what you shared there, Claire. But the next question, Tony, is that what questions do EdTech vendors need to answer?
There's lots of things that EdTech vendors could answer, and to some extent, some of the most important ones about educational impact, and they've always got to be asked. When you talk about due diligence and procurement with some schools, you will get the glazed over eyes. It's better than it used to be, a lot better. But it is very much a case of some of the questions aren't going across to the vendors, so the vendors aren't necessarily giving answers. It's really up to the vendors to be more proactive, actually, to be more transparent, because no disrespect to any legal colleagues or folk who've had legal training, but you can get the case where all you have from some vendors is a contract that's been written by a contract lawyer. So it's not necessarily somebody who understands education or data protection, privacy, security, and so on. So you're left with this sort of language that's not very helpful for the school when they're trying to look at what they're doing. I mean, the thing we have to remember is it is the school that is in control here, or should be in control. They should be the data controller. And so it's about EdTech's understanding what a school needs to do to get them on board, and that also means that the salespeople within EdTech should be aware of what's going on with the products and what information is used, what security is used. We're not expecting salespeople to be privacy experts or security experts, but we're expecting people to know where to go and look. We're expecting things to be written in a language that is clear and is plain and is accessible and gives the right answers for when the questions are coming up. As you get more and more schools, buying into DPO services and actually having the benefit of someone with more experience around talking with EdTech vendors, you will have a consistent set of questions coming to you to say, here you go, come and answer these. They will be about security. They will be about where the data is being processed. They will be about encryption. They will be about retention. There's lots of we can talk about retention, really. So all of these questions are quite simple to answer. And from a vendor's point of view, bolting that on at the end is a lot of effort when you're actually designing things within your products, actually asking yourselves those questions about what you need to share, about what's going on and what decisions you're looking at when you're deciding what functionality to stick in there. Those are the really important bits to make sure that it's easy to then get the message out. The by design bit is really important when we talk about data protection by design and by default, and security by design and by default. And you can easily see the vendors who get it. You really, really can.
But it seems to me then, Tony, like it's something which should be happening, right from the moment whilst people are developing things. If you're in the process of adding a new feature functionality, asking yourselves the questions around, what data will be needed and what retention will be needed around it, all these sort of things. And then once you've actually discovered that and discussed it with colleagues and all the rest of it, then articulating that back once the feature's in place, and then making that transparent for schools. That sounds like what you're trying to say to me. Is that my understanding? Is that correct? Yeah.
It's not just about having your terms of service or contract and then your data processing agreement, which is effectively the instructions from the controller, the school, to the data processor, the vendor. The vendor may have written them, but that's because they're based on a common set of functionality and services that are being delivered. But ultimately, it is that set of instructions, that agreement. But then it is about having a layer of technical information. It's about having a layer of guidance around the privacy by design, letting people know, turn this off. Or if you're going to do this, you need to turn this on, but make sure that you actually have thought about it and can show you've thought about it. We don't have that responsibility. It's the schools who have that responsibility. And it's not likely to be one person in the school. Actually, it'll be a team of people within the school who will be thinking about that. And then they'll be drawing on the expert knowledge of folk like Claire to actually then translate that and say, well, what does that mean? How do we need to do things? So yeah, transparency, proactive, there's lots of different ways you can say it, but it actually means thinking about your customers.
Brilliant, thank you, Tony. And that again segue leads really nicely on to my next question for Claire, which is bringing things back into schools, like Tony was doing at the end there. What does best practice look like?
So best practice when it's coming to buying EdTech products or engaging with EdTech vendors, I guess, is what you specifically aiming at. Yeah. So I think for a school point of view, and again, really schools need to understand what the benefits of an intended use of EdTech are before they plunge in. So that's not just about the benefits in terms of saving staff time or efficiency, but actually in terms of lots of the learning tools that schools want to use or pupils need to use. What are the pedagogical benefits of those? And so vendors can really help by giving some really good research-backed evidence as to why their product's going to make that difference. Why should the school spend time, money and resources on investing in your piece of technology? And actually, why should the schools put their eggs into your basket? So, I always talk about schools having virtual filing cabinets full of pupil data. So schools, a couple of years ago, all of their data was in the 4 square walls of their school in filing cabinets, and now we're taking those filing cabinets and we're putting them on vendor clouds. So actually schools who are interested in best practice need to really understand the benefits and the risks and weigh those benefits against those risks. So we're going to do something fantastic with pupil data. Yes, it's going to be risky because we're taking it outside of the school's control. We're giving it to an external, usually commercial organisation to look after on our behalf. That's a risky thing to do, inevitably, but actually it's going to deliver some real benefits for our pupils. So a really good risk assessment is a key cornerstone to really good practice when it comes to embedding new technology in schools. What's the magic word for risk assessment? It's the data protection impact assessment, the DPIA. So it's a really big part of procurement processes. So best practice is starting that DPIA really early doors in a school. I had a great client this week. Actually, I was really proud of them. They sent me 2 DPIAs for 2 really similar products, and they want 2 website providers, and they wanted me to look at both. And I said, just checking out here, you sent me 2 DPIAs for 2 really similar vendors. Why is that? And they went, oh, we haven't decided which vendor we're going to go for yet. We're just going to run the DPIA process for both and see which one comes out better. And I was overjoyed with that, because that school had embedded a real data protection culture, data protection by design. They were going to buy they were going to take into a whole heap of factors, not just who did the glossiest sales pitch, but actually which one was going to stack up better on data protection. And it was a great opportunity for me to go, well, actually, look at those DPIs. This one is going to work out better. So they're like, right, let's go with that one then. So best practice is embedding that risk assessment in, and then revisiting the risk assessment. Again, I had another school with me this week. They were like, I just want to get all the DPIAs done and I want to get them put to bed. Well, no, you don't put a DPIA to bed. You don't let it go to sleep. You keep it awake, you revisit it, keep it alive, keep reassessing that risk and really thinking about the risk and benefit analysis, just as much as you would take a risk assessment before you took pupils on a school trip. You're going to do that risk assessment before you start putting pupils' data on vendor clouds.
And just because you do that risk assessment once for a school trip location doesn't mean you don't go back to it. You do. You think about, has anything changed when we're doing the trip this year? You do go back to it. I try to think about risk assessments as how we can apply as much common sense as possible to things, and a sense of pragmatism. And I mentioned health and safety, and again, you usually get the glazed eyes, but then you explain that actually every single moment of every single day, teachers are doing risk assessments. And it may be that, you know, they walk into a classroom and it's flooded. What do? Do you go in there and teach a lesson? No, you don't. Why? It's common sense. Actually, you've just done a bit of a risk assessment. You walk into a classroom and you find that all the children have piled together the tables and chairs into a pyramid because they want to stick something on the ceiling. And yes, that was me as a little boy. So, you know, and you know full well that's not on, and you've got to de-escalate that and make sure everybody's safe and deal with all of the ins and outs of it. But again, most of it is common sense, and this is the exact same thing. You know, it's
I think you're absolutely right, Tony. I was going to sort of say a similar thing, because these things aren't. You mentioned, Claire, the idea that DPIAs and the like are things to be done, and once they're done, that's it. It's sort of done and dusted with for the year, sort of thing. But so your analogy, Tony, about you know, taking the temperature risk assessments. My son told me today there was a furore in his class because there was a huge spider in the corner of the classroom. You know, teachers are always taking the temperature of learning, taking the temperature of progress, all these different things. And I think it's kind of a very, very similar thing with this. But when you've got those, you gave 2 examples, Claire, of schools that are doing what you say things well, versus the let's get this job done, it's done for the year, let's get it out of the way with. And
we've bought this. We've bought this. We want to upload the data tomorrow. Can you help us with a risk assessment?
Yeah.
Not my favourite moment.
Sometimes that's down to buy-in and understanding about the processes, why it's important, how it works, all that sort of thing. Now, obviously, I'm preaching to the choir here, but I want to sort of pull on that string a little bit if I could, because I think buy-in is absolutely key to make sure that people understand. So, have you got any strategies to kind of like, you know, perhaps like improve or increase buy-in of understanding? Is it a training need? Is it something different? What do you suggest?
Well, so we try to do lots of training for frontline staff, for teaching assistants, for people who are making those decisions, who are, you know, actually doing stuff with that pupil personal data, or the HR team that actually wants to upload that brand new amazing HR system that they've found. And so what we do is a lot of face-to-face training. So a lot of training, really talking to those staff about what it is. And we have some cartoons. I think we have a cartoon of a shiny man in a shiny briefcase saying, do you mind if you just come and put all your pupil information in my lovely shiny briefcase? And you would never do that. You would never go, yeah, sure, I'll just give you everything. You've turned up to my school. You've got a shiny looking briefcase there, and I'm just going to give you all the data. So we tried to make it humorous and draw those real life analogies. You wouldn't just give personal data to a stranger on the street. So just because an ed tech vendor's got a really glossy website and has done a really fancy sales pitch, and you know, it's the talk of everybody on X, or it's, you know, everybody in the cluster of schools around you is using it and it's the latest fad. That doesn't mean that you just go for it. You have to do your own risk assessment and consider it, because you are effectively handing over the keys to that filing cabinet, you know, putting it in that shiny looking sales briefcase. So really doing that. Then, of course, I suppose the thing is then, if a DPIA risk assessment does come too late, and I guess people who are listening to this might be school staff who work in business function of a school and experience this. We've bought this. Our all systems go. Can you set up the API integration with our management information system? What? You know, it's about okay, well, that's happened. Not ideal. We're going to do the DPIA. We're going to try and keep up. We're not the department of no. So actually, we're going to make this work for you. But probably if you've brought a DPIA to me very, very last minute or retrospective, because this is already signed, I'm probably going to, as the DPO, going to write a vice note on the front saying, DPO notes this process has already started. This was already committed to before it came to me for review and approval. In future, make sure you integrate it as part of your procurement processes. So that's a really great way of buying in. You know, that goes to your senior leaders. Also talking about, you know, buy-in. If you've got a procurement form, a paper form maybe that people have to fill in, put a checkbox. Has this been checked for risk assessment? Has it, you know, have you looked at the cybersecurity things of this provider? So embedding it into those processes, and just then again, just keeping it light, keeping it humorous. If you are a school business manager, if you have weekly meetings with faculties, you know, go to those meetings, go and talk to the people who are dealing with these systems and ask them, is there anything new on the horizon? Have you seen anything? Are you thinking of buying anything? You know, come and talk to me about it. So as a compliance professional, you know, obviously I don't work in schools, I'm a service provider to schools. But if you're a compliance professional in a school or a multi-academy trust, go and talk to your teams. Go and keep that alive. Go and find them and ask them what's going on. Go to the conferences and talk about it.
It's very important.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
because when you're starting to look at things, you know, if you know you're doing your school 5-year plan, you're looking at what your targets are, and you're looking at things that the purposes of what you're going to use different technologies for. And you know, at that point, you can turn around and say, okay, if we're using this to do X, Y, and Z, what do we need to do that? What data do we need? You know, what engagement with parents do we need? You know, so it is start from very first steps. You know, I'm an ex-governor, so I know you're governor at the moment, Claire, and it was always that. Well, what's coming up? What you know, sort of, and getting people to ask the questions really early on, and then you know, at that point, you'd find that actually not one person had all the answers, so you'd be able to turn around and say, okay. So in that case, not one person can make all the decisions. Or if there's a decision, that means that stakeholders have got to have some input into it. And that's the baseline of things that are happening within schools. It's a case of, you know, you do that for lots of other things within the school. So it's just the exact same practice, but just putting a, you know, data protection steer on it. I mean, we could say how things link in with safeguarding and that side of things. I know that's a topic that we can sort of talk about later on as well, but it really is a case of looking at those first principles of what do we want to do, what do we need to do it. And once you get past that, then actually it makes the rest of the decision process around the risk assessment so much easier, because you're not sort of going halfway through and then suddenly realizing, oh, I forgot about this, which I'll hold my hand up and say that, you know, I've been in that position before. And, you know, it's just one of those things. You just, as early on as you can get it, that's when you get buy-in, because get it in early, it's less work overall. Less work overall, you've got more chance of buy-in, because it doesn't feel like it's an industry anymore.
I think it's a great point about tying things into the school improvement plan there. School improvement plan is an incredibly powerful document in a school and should be driving a lot of those purchasing decisions. So actually, you know, as the compliance professional, if you're looking around, what's happening in the school improvement plan and where the school are likely to need to drive change, and that change almost inevitably is via technology these days. So actually, you know, looking that, and as I say, again, as a compliance professional, I have real sympathy with schools because they are under a lot of pressure to adopt digital systems now. So, you know, it's always sort of between the lines, but you get the feeling that the Ofsted are pleased and Ofsted are happy when there's an electronic safeguarding system in place. You know, the big two providers, you know, and they don't say explicitly there was this electronic thing and it was all singing and all dancing, but you can tell. Same for things like phonics schemes. If you can see, Ofsted of reports tend to, you know, where there's a buy-in to a big piece of ed tech around a phonics scheme, Ofsted are pleased. So again, you know, getting that buy-in is really hard because, you know, the teaching professionals and leadership professionals are under such pressure to adopt this quickly because Ofsted are going to come in 2 weeks and they're going to want to see this system fully embedded. But I suppose really getting that buy-in as well is about actually, and what I say to schools who are doing really well, who've got really mature programs, is, you know, wear that with pride. So I have schools who do really well, and particularly individuals who do really well. So I send them a certificate. You're my data protection champion. Put it on your school office. So when Ofsted come in, I'm a data protection champion. I work really hard on this. I take it really seriously. And, you know, use that opportunity to tell your school improvement advisor, Ofsted, whoever comes in, yeah, we take, you know, data protection is and cybersecurity. We're all over it. We're working on it. And this is all the lovely evidence we've got because we understand the safeguarding of our children extends to their digital, the digital sharing of their data as well. So, you know, buy it in. And as I say, I'll have a conversation with schools now when they start a relationship with me. I say, what sort of compliance do you want? Do you want to do just a tick box compliance so that we get ourselves out of trouble? Or do you really want to have it that you have got something to be really proud of and you can engender trust and a great relationship with your key stakeholders, your parent community? And they go, oh yeah, that's what I want, obviously. Yeah, I want real meaningful compliance that, you know, that means I'm going to have really great relationships with my parents who are going to trust me. So that's a great way of buying in as well.
Brilliant stuff, both of you. Thank you. There are a few sort of strands in there that I'd like to sort of pull on a little bit. One of the things was you were talking, Claire, about some teachers who might sort of see something new and shiny, the latest thing on social media that everyone seems to be using. Also the pressures that schools are under. I love the fact that you referenced that the school improvement plan can be a driver for some purchases as well. And often, you know, obviously technology is really powerful. Something that's been really,
Fantastic. Love it.
something that's been really powerful and really popular in the last sort of 11 months or so has been the use of artificial intelligence. Like many, I've been sharing resources around these sort of things and talking about it, and a lot of the training I've been delivering in schools has been sort of centered around that. And I had a really interesting question from someone the other day, actually, asking me, following a sharing of a resource using generative AI, and they asked me the question, and I'll just quote it. Should we require, this is a consent question, should we require that students/parents consent for student work to be uploaded, for example, for AI to generate feedback? I wondered, both of you, if you could share sort of your thoughts about engaging with new technologies such as this, where it sort of fits in, how it sits, what responsibilities the schools have, and you know, what is it about consent? So don't know who'd like to have a go first.
Little bit of myth busting might be in order. Then you say, Claire.
Oh, I'm just like, I want to say all of the things all at once on this.
Right. So let's start off with consent first, and that's probably the best one to target. As a lawful basis, because everything you do needs to have a purpose, which is the reason, then it needs to be backed up by that reason is actually a valid and legitimate reason. So that's your lawful basis. And there's consent's only one of them. Okay. And whilst there isn't a pecking order, we have to remember that consent is freely given. And if consent is withdrawn, it's not going to have a detrimental effect on anybody. So at that point, you can quite clearly see why consent may not be used in schools a lot, because, well, for example, let's just say little Johnny is late quite often because he pops into the shop on the way into school to get some chocky bars in the morning, and he turns around and says, I want you to delete my stuff, or I don't give you consent to hold my attendance data. It just wouldn't work. So there are other lawful bases, and the main one that gets used in school is public task, which is a task in public interest or under the official authority of the organisation. So that's for anyone that is a public authority, which schools are. If you're a multi-company trust, it's the trust that's the authority, not individual schools. And at that point, it's a case of, well, public task has got a number of safeguards around it so that schools can do their job, basically. And they can't, I wouldn't necessarily, they can't be stopped, but if they need to use data and they need to use it, they can use it. Obviously, every circumstance needs to be looked at, and every system that you use needs to be looked at for its own reason and for its own lawful basis. So things like, so anything that uses biometrics, there's another piece of legislation that says that because biometrics is special category data, it's effectively like a medical data, you have to have explicit consent for that, for children. And you can only use consent as a general lawful basis. And if the child or either parent objects, that's it, you just can't use it. And there's been some big court cases across Europe around that and how people have used it for catering systems and things like that and have done it wrong. Now, most of the catering providers are very clear about the best way of doing it. That doesn't necessarily mean that all schools follow the advice or guidance, but you can see where consent could be problematic there. So once
Sorry, I was going to say my best example for consent is only really appropriate in a school because of this power imbalance and because of this feeling of twisted arm consent. Consent is only really valid in a school if, for example, I would say, if a parent came up to a teacher in the playground and said, I really would rather you didn't do X with my child's data, whatever it is, and the school teacher says, that's fine, makes no difference, that's no problem, you can withhold consent for that, then that is the appropriate time to use consent. Again, or the biometric processing, because the law says you have to get consent for that. And so that generally in schools looks like putting photographs of children on websites and, the school photographer coming and taking photographs of them. I've seen things, all sorts of consents that get schools into all sorts of pickles. And then when I ask the school, well, what do you do about when a child refuses consent for this? They say, well, we kind of force the parent to consent anyway. This is not really consent, is it? It's just better not to. So consent is a real loaded term. I think consent as well has been very muddled in the UK by this kind of proliferation of consent around US-based products and their particular laws, and they've kind of crept over here, this sort of, and actually I think it's very unfair for parents because it gives them a misleading kind of sense of control over their education. It's very unfair for individual pupils because then they could potentially find themselves being educated in a different way, and so it's very difficult. In relation to AI, there's a clear answer about uploading pupil personal data into AI, and the DFE has come out and said, don't do it. So the DFE put it out in the summer, put a position statement on the use of generative AI in schools, and it said you should not be putting pupil personal data into generative AI tools. So if you're putting pupil work into generative AI, and it's feeding the model, you need to be really, really careful that that's not identifiable personal data. But in relation to whether you should put it in, I think, and again, I know, Mark, you've done a policy, I've done a policy as well. I've got a bit of a soft launch on my policy. I need to compare my policy against your policy to see which bits I've missed. But a school has got to have a really clear policy around this and be fair and transparent. So fairness and transparency does not mean getting consent. So those things, just, you can be fair and be transparent and not rely on consent as a basis for processing. Those things are not inextricably linked. So it's about saying, and it's about, again, it's about having a real clear policy for uploading pupil work for feedback purposes or using it to mark work or whatever.
It's also worth remembering that this is all where the school is the data controller. They're the ones making decisions. One of the areas that we start sliding into is where the vendor is making decisions and is using the data for their own purposes. And that training of the generative AI is one of those areas where that's why the DfE has turned around and said no, because it's being used by a vendor for their own reasons, not for the benefit necessarily of that particular school or those particular children. So there are other things that also, so I mean, if you take Microsoft and Google, they're the big two that are doing things within schools, and the lockdown obviously accelerated the use of those. But there are some parts of it that aren't necessarily under the school's control. Both Microsoft and Google are very clear about which ones are or aren't, and they've got good guidance about, sort of what configurations to do and things like that. But again, that relies on the school doing their bit, and there is a technical element of that starts coming in, and you need to have some specialist knowledge around how to do those bits and pieces, whether you're Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace for Education, school. And it's so much about making sure that the customers, the schools, know where to look for how you do that configuration. Because, an example would be one of the quiz add-ons that Microsoft had available within Teams. They've actually changed it now. It's actually baked into Teams as part of the product. Originally was an add-on, and it would take the pupil data and use it for its own purposes. And that caused some problems where it was pointed out to them, and it got passed on to the US legal team, who said, oh, but it's all okay over here. But it's not in the UK, which they accepted. They started to change.
There's a real problem with these shadow contracts in some of these vendors as well, where the school thinks that they're interacting with Google and a Google service, or Microsoft and a Microsoft service. It's not. It's actually an external partner that they've got some kind of a link with, and the school think it's all part of one, and they don't understand. There's a couple, I won't name names because I'm picking on some, but there's a couple where you look and they think this is fine because it's Google, and I've done a DPIA for Google, and so we're just going to put this add-on, but it's not. It's a shadow contract. It's an entirely different company that's just got a bit of an integration with Google, so they're a real concern because you can't keep the risk on that.
So what can schools do about that? Because, like we said from the outset of this conversation, Claire, there's so much to think about in schools.
It's horrible, yeah.
So what's your advice?
Again, it goes back to what we talked about earlier about that buy-in and coming back and just always questioning, never just presuming, never just clicking on, oh, I accept terms and conditions. Always at that point, yes, you can go to a popular furniture store and you can be presented with a 3-page contract for the sofa that you're about to pay for. And you think, well, that's fine. I'm not bothered about whether I read the terms and conditions for this sofa. It's on me. But when you're doing it on behalf of other people, you read the whole contract. You don't just sign it. And so when it comes to school staff, it's again, and we get this, don't we? Click fatigue, click accept cookies, accept this, get past this screen because I want to get onto that thing. So it's about really training your staff not to just click accept on those terms and conditions, to stop, to pause, to take a breather and come back and check. I just want to check that out with you, and having a little bit of patience. And it's hard, isn't it? You get that bright shiny thing. Oh, I'm going to enable this. That's really exciting. The kids are going to love it. But you are not just signing your life away, you're signing other people's personal privacy and their data away. Take risks, sign up for whatever platform you want to sign up for if it's just you. But when you're holding responsibility for other people, you just can't do that. So check before you click accept.
And all of
And
these
that's
add-ons that you get, you know, when you go to the relevant application store, program store, whatever for these systems, they have in there the links to their privacy policies or privacy notices, or to the data processing agreement, which is what it really should be in there. And it is a case of you go and have a look before you click accept to the permissions, and also check what permissions it's asking for. Before you click accept, go and have a look. And again, this comes back to vendors being transparent and using decent language instead of a 52-page contract for what should actually be 2 pages.
I think, Tony, that's probably the answer to your one of 3 things that I'm going to be asking you for on the next question, because my next question for you both is about sort of sharing 3 things that school leaders or DPOs or other people with responsibility around this sort of stuff in schools should have front and center in their thinking. So, Tony, if you take that as your first one as being things that people should have sort of front and center, and knowing you probably already got your 3, and that probably wasn't one of them. So I might give you a bonus one later. But I'm mindful of time.
Yeah.
What are your sort of top 3 things that should be front and center in the minds of people in schools, do you think, Tony?
Don't treat it as a silo. Okay, it's not an IT thing. It's not a compliance thing. It's not just an ed tech shiny thing. Think about the people who need to be involved, and the stakeholders are part of that. So that'd probably be number 2. And my last one is to understand relationships, not just between you and a vendor, but you and other people you work with. So it might be the local authority that you need to share data with. It might be another school because you're doing, you know, outside of your mat or whatever, because you're doing partnership programs, multi-agency, safeguarding hubs, all these things. You know, understand how data gets shared, because, you know, especially with safeguarding, you should always share the data. If it needs to be shared, you share it. Okay, and then you go back, because it's not that safeguarding trumps anything. Safeguarding is a purpose. It's got a lawful basis behind it, so it's perfectly okay. But you just need to make sure that you are doing things safely. Might be the easiest way of saying it. So understand your relationships between you and the vendors, and also the community around you and other people involved. And the same goes for vendors themselves, to be honest, as well. They should be aware of their relationships and how it has a knock-on effect with other areas within school life.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you, Tony. So read the T's and C's and click on the privacy policies and check those out. Don't see things in silos, and then build on those important relationships. Thank you very much, Tony. What about you, Claire? What are your sort of top?
So I've also written my
front and
3
centre?
down. I've also written my 3 down, but we have talked about one of them. So keep your team involved. Get your team involved. As I say, it's not a one-person job. It's not a business function. It's the function of everybody in the school. So really make sure your whole team is involved, and everybody has a little piece of that little compliance jigsaw, and make sure they understand that they've got that piece and that it's their responsibility to pop it in the picture. Schools really need to make sure that they remember that they are just as responsible for data held by external vendors as if it was in their school. So just imagine the keys to your school doors and to your school filing cabinets. Imagine giving those to your vendors. Would you feel comfortable? Can you trust them? You need to check them out. Don't just take a shiny website and a shiny sales pitch for good enough. You know, you have to check them out. Remember that commercial vendors may not have the same objectives as you. Particularly if you've always used a really lovely small product that's maybe being built by somebody who used to be an ex-teacher, who's really heavily involved and is invested in pupils and really connected with pupils in the same way that you are in your school. Just think that, you know, that company is really successful. It gets bought out by another ed tech vendor. It's like hungry hippos in the ed tech world, isn't it now, with all these big guys grabbing all of these small companies. So, you know, think about that product. And is the company that holds that, have they got the same values at heart? What are their objectives in relation to the data? Because it might not match. So those are my 3 things.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much indeed, both. We're 10 minutes or so away from the end of the webinar. We've touched on online safety, and something that becomes sort of fresh in everyone's minds every year when it gets updated is the KICSI document, the Keeping Children Safe in Education. One of the things which featured quite heavily in conversations this year was this talk in there about monitoring, device monitoring and filtering. Can you sort of give me any advice around any of that sort of thing? And do you think AI should play a part in device monitoring and filtering in schools? I'll go to you first, Tony, if that's okay.
Well, as Claire was saying earlier, DfE have been fairly clear about AI and personal data. That makes it very difficult to consider personal data and AI within filtering and monitoring. That's not to say that algorithms can't be used, but it's just a case of, you know, having things that are already baked into the product. It's not things that have been using personal data to do some more training. So, you know, it is a case of having to think carefully about that. Do I think it'll stay that way forever? Probably not. I think it will change. Partly as the generative AIs, as the LLMs become more walled garden affairs, and so actually are baked into products and actually are part of everything that's going on. And yes, there may be some legislation change involved with that as well. You know, we don't know what's going to happen next necessarily. We know obviously the online safety bill is about to get the royal assent. We've still got the data protection DPDI going through as well, so there could be some change there. But the main thing around filtering and monitoring that's changed for me is the emphasis on the responsibility within schools and trusts has gone to the DSLs and SLT. It's no longer an IT thing, which is probably the best thing that could have happened to it. It's taken 12 years to get to that position, I think. And that's a really good position to be in. That's not to say that IT aren't involved, and that's not to say that delegation isn't a key aspect of these things. And I was asked the other day about, you know, sort of, well, what training do IT staff now need because of all of this? And actually, it should only probably be half an hour to an hour. I was thinking about it when I was going through all the various bits and pieces. You could easily do a full day, you know, a good 6-7 hours of training for IT staff, making sure that they're aware of safeguarding, interagency responses, but also covering things like well-being for staff, because you've got staff who are now going to be looking at things or possibly checking things which, you know, they may not like having to see. And so you've got to think about the well-being of your staff. Your DSLs are going to get far more stuff now. But yeah, you need to check on the well-being of your staff. And that's probably one of the key things I take out from this.
I think Tony's made a really good point about algorithms and AI and algorithms being slightly different things. I find it really frustrating as a data protection officer that everything that is an algorithm is now being rebadged as AI. Algorithms is sales, yeah. What's this funky new AI? No, it's not. It's just algorithm. It's a bit of maths. Anyway, derisory comments aside. So filtering and monitoring is massive. Automated processing or AI, or automated processing or algorithms are likely to play a part in filtering and monitoring, especially monitoring, because it's going to be ticking away in the background looking for unusual activity, looking for those trigger words. So there's going to be an element of automated processing. When it comes to automated processing, the GDPR has got some specific safeguards in relation to that around, you know, you've got to make sure there's a human in the loop on that sort of thing. So when it comes to monitoring in particular, you know, I said to Tony earlier, I said, monitoring is not monitoring. If you are getting 50 alerts a day from your monitoring software saying a trigger word has been, you know, entered into the system by a pupil, and you can't deal, 500 probably, yeah, and you can't deal with the sheer amounts, you stick it all in a subfolder and have it all go in there, and then you leave it there. That is not monitoring. You're not monitoring. So as I say, you need to think, yeah, about using some automated processing to help you manage that burden and to interact with whatever software you've got, so that monitoring is taking place, that you're allowing the technology to take some of that strain for you, but that actually you stay in the loop, because it's really clear that you can't just go, oh, well, the tech's got it and I don't need to worry about it. And as I say, if the tech's got it and the tech is telling you there's a problem and there's an alert you need to look at, then you need to look at it. Monitoring isn't just having the piece of kit that does it for you.
Configuring the tech, and that's, you know, the school's decisions and choices, configuring the tech to help prioritize things. Because yes, it may be an algorithm, but you're configuring what those priorities and those rules are to actually make a difference. And without that, you could get inundated. So, you know, years ago when I was having to do the daily checks on what was being caught by filters, other bits and pieces, and all the logs, it was horrendous at times, and we had to probably on a termly basis sit down and have a look at the scoring and how we did the rules and things like that. That's fine when you're looking at one school, but when you were looking at it as part of a local authority or as a regional broadband consortia, there was a lot more going into that side of things. But it's a case of it does come down to working out what your priorities are, and actually using the technology to support that, rather than it just being stuck in there and then just letting it bombard you with emails.
Brilliant, Tony. Well, listen, thank you both for all of your insights shared across this webinar this afternoon. Were there any final thoughts that either of you wanted to share before I wrap things up at the top of the hour? Any comments or final thoughts at all from yourself, Claire?
Oh gosh, no, just that it's really hard, and actually people like us have got your back, and so, you know, use us. We are here to try and help you. You know, I'm more than happy for people to reach out to me on the social medias, and I always try to share as much as I possibly can. You know, what I see is that the big issues. I love to talk about people that are doing it right. That's my favorite thing. So if you are an ed tech company who you think you're getting it really right, come and talk to me, because I'm really happy to share that and say to other schools and to other ed techs, look, this company's doing it really right, please do it like them. So, you know, and I will always sort of give a little bit of feedback as well to those companies and to those schools who do need a little bit of a leg up. So yeah, don't be alone, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you very much, Claire. And hopefully NetSupport falls into one of those brackets. But,
oh, you do, of course.
If people do want to,
you better, Tony, or you'd be in trouble.
If you just to jump in before you do your sort of wrap up, Tony. If you do want to follow Claire on social media, she is EduDataHub, I believe, if I got that right, on Twitter. Or if you go onto LinkedIn and search for Claire Archibald, you can see her name there on the screen. You will find her pretty quickly, I am sure. Thanks for sharing your final thoughts there, Claire. Tony, sorry for interrupting you.
I'm going to go back and I'm going to put that third, the three key
bonus
things,
one.
The bonus one. I'm going to stick that in there. And it's it's going to be quite a big one. I'm just going to say records management. One of the most important parts of that is retention. You don't keep hold of things you don't need. That helps you with those horribly aggressive subject access requests you might get. It also helps staff find things a bit better. You've got information that isn't kept in email, it's actually put into the right system, whether it's, you know, My Concern, CPOMs, the MIS, whatever. So yeah, where you store things and how long you keep them for. You know, we could do a full day on that alone. Claire could do far more than the full day, to be honest. So yeah, it's a case of that's what I would stick in as my bonus one.
I think it's wind me up and watch me go when it comes to records management.
Well, organisation is absolutely key, but and I can understand how it happens. The schools are frantic beings with many moving parts, and that's just the 1,200 minimum students that you've got in a secondary school. You know, there are so many complex things going on. But you're absolutely right. If you are organised and you know where things should be and how long you should keep them for and all that sort of thing, it can help in so many different ways. So thank you for highlighting that point, Tony. Where can people find you on social media? You've got more handles than
Yeah,
50 rally choppers, haven't you? So where can people sort of come and find you, Tony?
the most common one people find me is Grumble Duke. I show a lot of things on there. If you're looking for specifically data protection, that's our GDPR Tiger. And if you're a vendor who's looking at, or specialist who's looking at things within ed tech from a vendor point of view, My World of Data.
Brilliant stuff. Well, listen, thank you very much again to you, Tony, and to you, Claire, for sharing your insights over the last hour. It's been absolutely fantastic to learn and get those little golden nuggets. And actually, it's been really nice knowing that we don't have to be scared by all this stuff. And certainly when we've got plenty of lovely people like both of you there to help us through on that journey.
No one's perfect.
Unless you're practically perfect like Mary Poppins, of course, Tony. Listen, thank you to both of you. Thank you to you for joining us for this, our final webinar in a series of 3. My name's Mark Anderson. If you wanted to connect with me or ask any questions about some of the things that we do at NetSupport or any things that we've mentioned here today, you can follow me on social media as well. To search for ICT Evangelist and you'll find me. And finally, my massive thanks to NetSupport there on socials as at NetSupport Group. Where you can find all the previous webinars and all the resources and other things that we share to support teachers, middle and senior leaders right across education. Where you might occasionally see some things about our products too. Thanks for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed the webinar, and I'll hopefully see you on the next webinar that we run. Take care. Thanks for joining us, and thanks again to both you, Tony, and to Claire. And yeah, see you soon.